Anchorage, Alaska is shrouded in darkness for most of the year. For some, this climate is welcoming. For others, the darkness conceals perils that are almost too gruesome to imagine. 52-year-old Stephen Smith is originally from South Africa. It's unclear exactly why he came to the United States, but he did. In 2019, Smith picked up a sex worker in Anchorage. The events that followed are unknown, but at some point she stole his cell phone and fled the scene. She was expecting the device to be a good score, but she ended up finding something she could never have predicted. The phone contained video footage of Smith brutally murdering a Native Alaskan woman. Rather than keeping silent, the sex worker copied the footage to a memory card and handed it in to the police. The trial began in February of 2024. The sex worker was called to the stand as a witness, but the prosecution hardly needed her. The video footage clearly showed Smith torturing the woman and then taking her life. He even narrated the video. At one point he said, "In my movies, everybody always dies. What are my followers going to think of me? People need to know when they are being serial killed." Smith had also confessed to another murder that he had committed before the one in the footage during an interrogation. Despite this, he pled not guilty to all charges. His wife, Stephanie Bisland, watched as Smith was found guilty of 14 charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of sexual assault. His 2 victims were Veronica Abuchuk in either 2018 or 2019 and Kathleen Henry in 2019. Smith took Veronica's life in his living room with a green gun, and Kathleen met her demise in a Marriott hotel room. During the trial, the prosecutors shed some more light on the specifics of Smith's activities. He preyed on vulnerable women in particular. Both of his victims were homeless and of Native Alaskan descent. Veronica's daughter stated that her mother had also struggled with alcohol addiction. As a kid, I really didn't understand why or how my mother was, but as an adult, I just really felt for her. She would even speak about, going to treatment and it not being a good experience for her. Investigators found additional devices in Smith's home that showed images and videos of Veronica's murder. Smith received a life sentence because Alaska does not have the death penalty. A man who had married into Veronica's family sat through the entire trial. "We weren't invisible, and we are people." He stated that they were treated with respect and the police handled the case professionally. Smith's wife commented on her marriage, saying, "He was very good for me, but he had another life, I guess." She suspected that her husband's issues had been exacerbated by heavy drinking. She stated that she will not seek a divorce because she said her vows and refuses to break them. I would personally argue that Smith already broke his vows and Stephanie has every right to divorce him, but I suppose not everyone agrees. In 2017, 16-year-old Crystal Kaiser met a man named Randall Villar III on an advertising website called Backpage. At the time, Crystal had no idea how much danger she was in. You see, Villar was looking for young girls for a very sickening reason. He sexually abused Crystal and then proceeded to traffic her. This was far from the only time Villar had ever committed these types of heinous acts. In February of 2018, the police received a call from a 15-year-old girl telling them that Villar had drugged her and was planning on murdering her. Law enforcement later found the girl wandering the streets half naked and high out of her mind on LSD. They got a search warrant for Villar's home and found further evidence of sexual child abuse. There were hundreds of videotapes of Villar abusing Crystal, as well as numerous other underage girls. All of the victims were black. On February 22nd, Villar was arrested on charges of child enticement, second-degree sexual assault of a child, and using a computer to facilitate a child sex crime. He was released on the same day without bail. The police waited 3 months before finally submitting the case to prosecutors, but by that point, it was already too late. Karma was coming. On June 5th of 2018, Crystal Kaiser shot and killed Randall Villar in a revenge hit. She was arrested for the murder and charged as an adult with first-degree murder, a charge that carries a mandatory life sentence in Wisconsin. She was also charged with arson for burning Villar's house down and theft for stealing his car. Her bail was initially set at $1 million, but a Kenosha County Circuit Court judge lowered that figure to $400,000 in February of 2020. Crystal posted bail with donations from the Chicago Community Bond Fund, the Milwaukee Freedom Fund, Survived and Punished, and the Crystal Kaiser Defense Committee. She was released on June 22nd of 2020 after spending almost 2 years in prison. Despite having been released, Crystal's case was still ongoing. She invoked a Wisconsin statute that provides human trafficking victims with a special type of legal defense. Essentially, this statute dissolves the victim's legal responsibility for any illegal activity they committed in relation to the trafficking. The prosecutors argued that Crystal had not killed Villar because he had trafficked her, but rather because she had wanted to steal his car, which in my opinion is complete nonsense. A Kenosha County District Attorney named Michael Gravely stated that permitting vigilante justice, which is the narrative from some seeking dismissal, is a highly subjective slippery slope. In December of 2019, the judge barred Crystal from raising the affirmative defense at trial because he thought the wording of the statute was ambiguous. Crystal appealed this ruling in the Wisconsin Court of Appeals, which overturned the trial court's ruling in June of 2021. They determined that the trial court had been incorrect in their interpretation of the statute, and Crystal could provide evidence that she was trafficked. Although the appellate court ruled on the interpretation of the statute, they did not say anything about whether or not it applied to Crystal's circumstances specifically. The prosecutors appealed the decision, but the state Supreme Court upheld the appellate court's decision in July of 2022. Furthermore, the state Supreme Court ruled that the affirmative defense statute was a complete defense against legal prosecution, not a mitigating defense. In other words, the statute would protect Crystal from prosecution entirely, as opposed to only lowering her sentence. In October of 2023, the trial court ruled that the statements Crystal had made during her police interrogation were not admissible because she had never received a Miranda warning while she was in custody, and her attorney had also not been present. In January of 2024, Crystal was charged with a misdemeanor for disorderly conduct. Her bail was revoked and she was arrested for a second time on February 13th. Her trial is scheduled for June 10th of 2024. Crystal Kaiser's trial made history in Wisconsin, being the first trial to ever invoke the affirmative defense statute for trafficking victims. Numerous different opinions exist on the case, but most of them are in favor of Crystal. A philosopher named Susanna Siegel stated that Crystal's actions were in self-defense, not vigilantism. Along with another philosopher, she argues that the prosecutors have tried to cast trafficking victims in a negative light. A historian named Nikki Taylor, a law professor named Lisa Avalos, and many others have expressed their opinion that this case is an example of law enforcement's mistreatment of trafficking victims and their lack of sympathy. Philosopher Ayanna Spencer and journalist Brianna Banks both cite the case as an example of the socio-political biases which cause black females to be perceived as more sexually mature than they really are. Banks argues that this, in turn, caused the justice system to view Crystal as complicit in her sexual abuse, which caused law enforcement and the prosecution to view her as a voluntary prostitute rather than a victim. Sex crimes expert Rachel Monaco Wilcox stated that children of color are often viewed as willing participants in human trafficking cases. This case sparked large amounts of controversy in the media. A petition was started on change.org to secure Crystal's release from prison, and by September of 2020 it had gained over 1.5 million signatures. There is also a Free Crystal Kaiser campaign that supports her release. Once the trial starts in June, I'll give updates about its progress. On February 3rd of 2024, the dead body of a 12-year-old boy was found at Trails, Carolina, which is a therapeutic wilderness camp near Asheville, North Carolina. The boy was naked from the waist down. The Transylvania County Sheriff's Office identified the boy as CJH rather than providing his actual name. According to warrants, detectives found the body in a bunkhouse on its back with its knees bent upward. There was possible bruising around one eye. The investigators asked the camp staff how the boy's clothing had been removed, and the counselors stated that they did not know. When they rolled the body over, foam bubbled out of the mouth, which the warrants say could indicate some sort of poison. The boy was taken to the morgue for an autopsy, and the forensic pathologist said that the boy's death did not appear to be natural, although the cause of death has still not been conclusively determined. CJH was described as loud and irate by one camp counselor. He had also refused to eat dinner, but settled down to eat snacks afterwards. This same counselor reported that the boy had slept in a sleeping bag inside a small tent called a bivvy on his first night at camp. CJH had experienced a panic attack around midnight, but the counselor did not say whether or not camp staff had helped to ease the boy's anxiety. They also reported that they had checked the tent at midnight, 3 a.m., and 6 a.m. They found CJH dead at 7:45 a.m. The sheriff's office press release stated that the camp staff did not completely cooperate with the investigation. According to the investigators, camp staff refused to let them speak with any of the other children, including CJH's bunkmates. The camp also refused to give up names or ages. The detective said that child services had run into the same refusals. In response to the press release, the camp staff stated that they had fully cooperated and the sheriff's office did not present an accurate account of the facts, nor the current state of the investigation. According to camp staff, they had asked the parents of each child whether or not they would be comfortable having their children talk to the police, and they followed each parent's preference. They also claimed that they had relocated the remaining children in order to remove them from the crime scene. "We are a mental health facility treating children with severe, complex mental health diagnoses. Not moving children from the area would have harmed their mental well-being." Unfortunately, this is not the first time a camper at Trails Carolina has died. In 2014, 17-year-old Alec Lansing ran away from camp and was eventually found dead in a stream. According to law enforcement, he had died of hypothermia. A wilderness instructor who had previously worked for Trails Carolina said that most of the campers were not receiving the care they needed. "Some of these kids are trying to kill themselves. I didn't feel really prepared for exactly what I was getting into." As if all this wasn't enough, Trails Carolina is also facing a federal lawsuit filed by a former camper who claims she was sexually assaulted by another camper. According to her, she was only 14 years old when an older camper who had a history of sexual assaults attacked her. After she requested to be moved to a different cabin, camp staff refused and she was assaulted again. Hopefully this case can be solved and justice can be served in whatever form it needs to be for all parties involved. July of 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Nie was an honors student with a very bright future ahead of her. She loved to read and led an active social life. Her two best friends were Shelia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. Well, Skylar thought they were her best friends. The reality was completely different, but the poor girl would not realize this until it was too late. On July 5th of 2012, Skylar finished her shift at Wendy's in Star City, West Virginia, and returned to her family's apartment. The CCTV footage from the apartment complex shows Skylar leaving the building via her bedroom window shortly after midnight on July 6th. She entered a sedan with Eddy and Schoaf, and they drove away. Skylar would never be seen alive again. The authorities initially considered Skylar to be a runaway, and they refused to issue an Amber Alert for 48 hours. They received a tip very early in the case suggesting that Skylar may have been spotted in North Carolina, but this proved to be false. Her parents posted flyers all over the area, and the police determined that the sedan she had driven off in belonged to Eddy. They conducted an interview in which Eddy admitted to picking Skylar up, but she told the police that she had dropped her friend off an hour later. The FBI eventually joined the search, and Skylar's school friends started being interviewed. On January 3rd of 2013, Schoaf finally admitted to plotting Skylar's murder with Eddy. According to Schoaf, their motivation was that they didn't like Skylar and didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Schoaf led the investigators to Skylar's body, which was less than 30 miles from her home. On May 1st of 2013, Schoaf pled guilty to second-degree murder. According to Schoaf's statement, she and Eddy had picked Skylar up and driven her to Pennsylvania. Once they arrived, they exited the vehicle and began to socialize. Eddy and Schoaf then proceeded to stab Skylar to death at a predetermined time. They attempted to bury the corpse, but couldn't, so they covered it with branches instead. The state of West Virginia recommended a 20-year prison sentence, and Shoaf expressed remorse, apologizing to Skylar's family as well as her own family. She received 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. On September 4th of 2013, West Virginia prosecutors publicly named Eddie as the second perpetrator in Skylar's murder and announced that she would be tried as an adult. She was indicted by a grand jury on 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of first-degree murder, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. She pled not guilty, but after realizing that the Pennsylvania authorities might add even more charges to her trial, she pled guilty to first-degree murder. She never expressed any remorse for her actions. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. In May of 2023, Shoaf had a parole hearing in which she provided the real motivation for the murder. Eddie and Shoaf had been romantically involved, which caused tension between them and Skylar. She was denied parole and stayed in prison. Seeing as Rachel Shoaf was incarcerated in 2013, she is currently eligible for parole. I found this case while searching through the True Crime Discussion subreddit, where a user posted about the case with a link to a petition on change.org. The purpose of this petition is to keep Shoaf in prison instead of releasing her. As of the last time I checked, it had 3,204 signatures. Some people may believe that Shoaf deserves a second chance, but the cold reality is that Skylar will never get a second chance because of Shoaf's actions. Skylar will never graduate high school, will never attend college, will never buy a home or a car, will never start a family, and will never do anything else ever again, all because of the selfishness of 2 individuals whom she considered to be her closest friends. A link to the petition will be in the description below.